How about that? A packaged Famicom Disk System game. We haven't seen one of those since Hong Kong, which was released in March of this year. There aren't many of these left. And Backgammon also has something special for Nintendo. This is the last time that they use a generic title. You know, things like Mahjong, golf, ice hockey. By this point, everybody's realized that with video games, you really have to have a trademarkable title. I guess this means Backgammon's also the last time that an original Nintendo game will share a title with an original Atari game. Backgammon is of course based on the board game. There are some people who claim that Backgammon is the oldest board game in existence, but that's not remotely true. Backgammon in a recognizable form only dates back to the 17th century, and the modern rules really date to the mid-19th century. The claims that it's the oldest seem to be equating Backgammon with the royal game of but that's a root game with a lot of descendants, and things like Parcheesi, or Ludo if you're in the UK, are a lot closer to that root game than Backgammon is. The Disk System version of Backgammon includes a very extensive video tutorial, since Backgammon is effectively unknown in Japan. That makes it seem like this Disk System version probably came from a programming experiment, and it turned out well enough that Nintendo just decided to put it on a disc. Backgammon is one of those games where the strategies are straightforward enough, and developing a simple Backgammon game was a relatively common programming exercise for a while. Now, if you're a longtime viewer of this channel, you know that I have opinions about board games. For example, we've seen a lot of video games based on the traditional Japanese board game Sugoroku, and I absolutely despise it. Sugoroku is a game where the outcome is random. You roll a die, move that many spaces, and what space you land on has an effect like taking points away or making you lose a turn. The player has essentially no effect on the outcome of the game. The rare choices that the player makes are either immaterial or have an obvious best option. The reason I'm bringing up Sugoroku in this Backgammon video is because to someone without a background in board game design, Sugoroku and Backgammon are going to seem similar. However, Backgammon is the polar opposite of Sugoroku. There's a reason that it's endured and maintained popularity for more than a century. So that's right, it's time to get into the nitty-gritty of board game mechanics again. That's why this video about such a simple game goes on for so long. Backgammon is a racing game. The path around the board is 24 spaces long, and the start of your track is in the upper right, while the end is in the lower right. This Disk System version sets the pieces as red and white, and when you're playing on your own, you're always playing as white. That's more of a concession for visibility than anything else. Either side has a particular advantage. You start out with 15 pieces on the board, and they are positioned at intervals around the track. On every turn, you roll 2 dice. Well, except the first turn where both players roll a die and whoever got higher takes the turn. You use each individual die to move a token. So if you rolled a 5 and a 2, you can move a token 5 spaces, and you can move a token 2 spaces, and you could even use these both on the same token. If you roll doubles, then you move 4 times. There's no limit to the number of your tokens that can occupy a space. However, you cannot move onto your opponent's tokens if there's a stack of 2 or more. And if there's 1 token all by itself, then landing on it sends that token to the bar in the middle. So right there you can see one of the keys to Backgammon strategy. You want to move your pieces around as a formation where they'll be protected, but it's not always possible. You could easily have 10 viable moves when you roll the dice. Do you play aggressively and try to move fast? Or do you bunch up for safety? And as for knocking your opponent's pieces out, that carries its own risks. If you have a piece on the bar, then when you roll the dice, you have to get your pieces off the bar before you can do anything else. And the bar essentially acts as space 0. So if you roll a 1, then you can move a piece from the bar to the first space on the track. Though moving from the bar still has to obey all of the rest of the movement rules. In other words, you can always place where your pieces are, you can place into an empty space, and you can attack your opponent's pieces as you come off the bar. So hitting an opponent will put them back to the start of the race with that piece, but it also gives them more opportunities to attack you. But then maybe you've jammed up that end zone, in which case your opponent could be stuck, unable to move because they can't get their piece off the bar. This is a game of luck mitigation. Over the course of an entire game, both players are going to have about the same number of moves. An average game will have at least 24 turns, and over the course of a single match, the total of all the rolls that a player makes is going to wind up within a single die roll of the total for their opponent. If whether you win or lose a match of backgammon comes down to a single die roll, then you probably needed to use better strategy. If you want to get an advantage, you're going to have to take some risks. Bringing up a stack one way might make you vulnerable to 2 different numbers on the dice, but maybe if you get lucky and can make it through, then there's no opposing pieces behind that to stop you. That's the kind of trade-off you'll be making constantly in backgammon. Every turn you're going to be gauging whether or not it's the moment to make your big move. So while there's luck involved, it's luck that you have some input into. On top of that, you usually play backgammon as a set. The Disk System version here lets you either play matches of 5 or 11 games, or you can take part in a tournament of escalating opponents, with the number of wins increasing by 2 as you climb the ranks. Before you roll the dice, you can hit the B button, and that triggers the doubling cube. At the start, winning the game is only worth 1 point, but if you want to double, then it could be worth 2 points. Your opponent gets to choose whether they'll accept or not. If they refuse to accept the increased stakes, then they forfeit the game, but the winner only gains the points before doubling. You can't double indefinitely. After you've chosen to double, then your opponent has to choose to double. Basically, it makes sense to double when you think you have the advantage, and it provides a convenient way for someone to forfeit, moving things along more quickly. The way you finish up a game of backgammon is that once all of your pieces are in those last 6 spaces, then they can start moving home. You either have to move in the exact number of spaces, or if the value of the die is greater than the number of spaces remaining for your furthest piece, then you can just move the furthest piece in. Again, there's some real strategy here in how you can lock out an opponent, as well as efficiently move your pieces into home. If I have one complaint about Nintendo's backgammon, it's that the opponents are not very good. Now, some of that might be due to going through the tournament mode and not clearing the first match. There's also no way to save your progress in the tournament, so if you want to play through all 4 opponents there, you'll be at it for a while. I did try playing a standard match after a few tournament matches, and I didn't see a real difference in how the computer played there. So this isn't the smartest of opponents, though you can play 2 players if you've got a friend. Shockingly, backgammon did not do well for Nintendo. I saw an estimate that said that there's roughly 200,000 players of backgammon in Japan, so this is a title that didn't have a lot of appeal there. It'd be like if Microsoft released a shogi game in the US. My feeling here is that backgammon's not a bad introduction to the board game. The presentation's clean, the interface is easy enough, it works just fine. I also think that if you really like backgammon, you'd probably come away a little bit dissatisfied by the opponents. Well then, if you really like backgammon like that, you probably wouldn't want to go back to an 8-bit version anyways. Still, I think it's interesting that Nintendo even tried this. Maybe it's because we're in the era of the low-cost puzzle game, and backgammon's a simple enough board game to try to fit it into that pattern.